Welcome to Secure Software Development. We're, of course, going to begin the day the same way we begin every class by talking about... Oh, wait, someone's at the door. Hang on just a second. We are in luck because we have one of those video doorbells that lets us see who's there. So let's take a look and see if we can tell who's at the door. Oh man, it's Girl Scouts. They're here to sell us cookies. So, the obvious question when Girl Scouts come to your door is, can they get to us? And in this case, no, they can't get to us. We're safe from them because we have a sophisticated electronic door lock that uses NFC tags, or it uses a phone and a PIN to get in. And there's a 4-digit PIN you have to enter, or you have to have an NFC tag. They're probably not getting in to get us. Unless they could guess all the codes. But that's not going to work, right? Because when you have something like a PIN and someone guesses it wrong, you build a delay in. And if you guess it wrong enough times, you eventually get locked out. So there you go. If we didn't do that, it would be silly, right? If we didn't do that, for a 4-digit PIN, there are 10,000 combinations. You'll hit the correct one or one of the maybe 2 or 3 correct ones after about 5,000 attempts. And how long would that take? Well, if you can only guess once a second, if there's a 1-second delay, that'll take about 1.3 hours. Police response will probably get there. So even a small delay has a big impact. If we didn't delay it, and you could try, let's say, 1,000 codes a second, you could crack the code in just 5 seconds, and that would not be great, right? A 6-digit PIN, 8 minutes. So again, it's a good thing we have delays built in, because it would be bad if we didn't. And no one's going to build a security system with an obvious vulnerability that allows you to guess solve the codes. Oh yeah, so there's this company that makes these sophisticated locks, and as it says over on the right, they can be found protecting residential and corporate buildings globally. Nothing too important, I'm sure, but if some homes and maybe some businesses. So what was this vulnerability? Well, researchers built a special phone app to try all combinations until the administrative PIN was found. Then you can use the administrative PIN to add other codes or add other NFC tokens to the system, so that later on you can walk up and confidently badge in or put in your code and just walk right in like you are supposed to be going in. Well, that's not great. But again, it's just a few houses. Which ones? These 2, for example. So nothing too critical. Just a few. Other locks, though, are harder to break. Here's an example of somebody who got a couple locks, played around with them, and then went to Black Hat. So, and you can read about it at the link. So O'Flynn acquired 2 samples of home electronic locks, and he examined them. Now, the first one, he says, are susceptible to what he calls evil maid attacks. So what is an evil maid attack? Suppose you hire a maid to come in and clean your house. While she's in your house, she may be able to do things that allow her to have access later. Maybe she unlocks the back door. Maybe she unlocks a window. Maybe she stuffs something into the mortise of the door so she can get in later, right? She does something so she can get in later on. In this case, what she does is open the battery compartment of your sophisticated lock, because on the inside of the battery compartment are step-by-step instructions to add a new code to the lock. And there's no master code required. There's no security on it. If you just follow the instructions, you get to add a new code. So that's not great, right? That's not ideal. Well, that was the first lock. What about the second one? The second model didn't have this particular flaw. They didn't explain how to defeat it inside the battery compartment. But it did have a touchscreen. And you could take a kitchen knife and pop out the touchscreen. And then there was a little connector you could pull loose. And that connector, which connected the touchscreen to the rest of the lock, conveyed the codes as you punched them in. So you could plug something else into that connector, and you could simulate pressing the codes. Now you can enter the codes as fast as you want. But there's going to be some protections built in. For example, the lock manufacturer anticipated brute force attacks. After more than 3 incorrect tries, I don't know what that means. That means 4 incorrect tries? Fine, whatever. The lock's alarm activates. Now, what Flynn found was that if you glitched the interface, so you apply a little bit of voltage to that little external interface you have access to, apply a little voltage to it, it causes the lock to reset. So, you try code, you try another code, you glitch the lock so it resets. Then you try code, try another code, glitch it so it resets, and you can just keep going like that, and you'll never trigger the alarm. He could check about 120 codes per minute, right? That's about 2 codes per second. Going through all the 4-digit pin combinations takes about 85 minutes. So you could expect to get one of the codes in about half that time. But it gets better. Flynn found an example of code reuse. When you reuse code, sometimes in a different context, it may not have the exact result you want. In this case, he found that when you entered the first 4 digits, if they were wrong of the administrative code, the administrative code is 6 digits, so that should take you 100 times longer. But when you enter the first 4 digits, it immediately tells you whether the first 4 are correct or not. That means the problem of entering the 6 digits has been reduced to the problem of guessing the first 4 digits. Because once you've correctly gotten the first 4 digits, then you have 100 possibilities for the last 2, and you can do 120 per minute. So another minute will get you the last 2. Another half minute probably will get you the last 2. So that's not great. That's probably a case of code reuse. What are the implications of all this? Well, the first one is, I think, pretty obvious. If your code includes a secret that an adversary might try to guess, and you're in a small search space, and 10,000 possibilities is not a very big search space, you should use delays, and you should block further attempts. And you should also be aware of things like the glitching and resetting. You should be careful when you reuse security code in a new context. So in this case, they reused the code, I'm guessing, that validated the 4 digits, but they used it as part of the 6-digit code so that it tipped your hand, right? It gave the potential adversary information about the first 4 digits. And that takes us to our last point. Give your adversary as little information as reasonable about the security state of the system, right? Don't tell them if it's right or wrong. Don't have an alarm or any other feedback. If they enter the correct code, unlock the door. If they don't, just don't do anything. And of course, I picked on the Girl Scouts earlier, but go buy some Girl Scout cookies. When the Girl Scouts come around, my kids run to the door. They're all excited. We end up buying a bunch of boxes of Girl Scout cookies. You order them, they come later, and you're never home when they come, so your kids get them first. They eat them all, so you never get any of them, but they're really good cookies, and it supports some good stuff. Let's talk about the confused deputy. So a deputy is a program that acts on your behalf. And typically a deputy has privileges you don't have. Right? You need the deputy to do something for you that you can't do yourself. And if the deputy becomes confused and it has additional rights that you don't have, it may do something bad on your behalf. And bad's relative, right? I mean, maybe you want it to do that bad thing. You want it to do something you couldn't otherwise do. And right, we've already seen this. We saw this with PK Exec. In that case, an SUID program allowed us to do privilege escalation. When we couldn't do it on our own, we used this other program to get there. We saw it with the print spooler, right? With the Windows print spooler, we created a malicious print driver, had it install it for us, and then we were able to run code on this other device that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to. Confused deputies are everywhere. They're everywhere, even in the real world, right? Swatting is an example, right? I might think, if I just get a bunch of my friends and we dress up in riot gear and we show up at your house with automatic weapons, we're going to get in trouble. But if I trick the police into doing that, they won't get in trouble, right? I'll have the same effect. Swatting is an example of a confused deputy in the real world. Another famous example is from Die Hard. In Die Hard, the bad guy has to cut power to an entire skyscraper in order to unlock a safe. He can't do that, so he gets the FBI to cut power to the building, and that's how they're able to perpetrate the robbery. So let's think about it in the context in which it originally arose. So computers keep track of what you do so they can bill you. And on a timeshare system, if you want to run the compiler or you want to print something, someone has to pay for that time. And in this case, we can see over on the right-hand side a small little table where we have the subjects over here and the objects over here, and we can see that the user has some rights. They can execute the compiler, but they have no rights for the billing file, the thing that records how much you owe. Now, the compiler, of course, can write to the billing file because it needs to record that you have run the compiler and charge you appropriately. Great. So that all seems reasonable to me. The user is allowed to execute the compiler. The compiler is allowed to write to the billing file. So why not use the compiler to write to the billing file? You tell the compiler, hey, instead of writing your output to a .o file or whatever, write it to the billing file because it has the right to write there. And if it writes gibberish to the billing file, it will corrupt it, and then we won't get billed for our time. So periodically we might do this just so we don't get billed. So let's take a look at some examples of other confused deputies in the world. Suppose we have a website where you can transfer money and do that kind of stuff. We would like, let's say, because we're malicious, to have someone transfer money to our account. And maybe we'd like to be able to do that without their intervention. How might we accomplish that? Well, let's think about how it works. When you log into your bank and you send your credentials, the bank sends you back cookies. Yay, cookies. Cookies are little bits of information that are then stored in the browser. And in this case, they store information about an open session with the bank, right? You've established a session with the bank. Cookies are then stored in your browser, and typically they will expire after some period of time. Once you have the cookies, then you can do other things, right? Then you can connect again to the bank. You can send it a message to pay something on your behalf, and you also send back the cookies. So the bank can see that, yes, you have an open session, an open authenticated session, and then it will take the action and send money. Suppose that you go visit a site like happyfun.com, and when you visit that site, Happy and Fun reaches out to your bank and says, transfer money for this person that just visited me. Well, the bank's not going to do that because you don't have the cookies. So there's no open session between happyfun.com and the bank. So instead, what Happy Fun does is it hands back a hidden form or a hidden frame in the web page it returns to you. And within that hidden form or hidden frame is code that runs that then inside your browser reaches out to the bank to do the transfer. Because your browser is reaching out, your browser helpfully includes the cookies. If they were an open session, your bank sees that you have an open authenticated session, and then it pays whoever on your behalf without your knowledge. See what's happened here? The browser holds the cookies and can authenticate you to the bank. Happyfun.com is using the browser, right, as a confused deputy to cause the payment to happen. So what do we do to get around this, right? This is a problem. It's a very big problem, and you've probably heard about it. It's cross-site request forgery. Here, literally across sites, I am forging a request. And, if there's not protections in place, it may work really well. Maybe I don't have an open session with the bank, in which case it won't work. But if I've connected to the bank recently enough that I have cookies for a established connection, then it may. This is an injection attack. There are many others, right? SQL injection, JavaScript injection. In this case, I have injected a form, hidden form or a hidden frame into the web page that was returned to you that has code that runs. So, what might we do to protect against this? Well, one thing we can do is when you log into your bank and it sends you back a form, that form can include a invisible field with some secret additional information. We would typically call that a nonce. And that nonce would be linked to that form. So I have a couple of things now. I have two things. I have a cookie that tells the bank that I have an established authenticated connection. But in addition, in the form that I got back from the bank, I have a secret code that I can then pass back in when I complete the form. So now what happens when I connect, I enter my information, I submit the form goes back with the cookies. The bank can see that, yes, I have an authenticated open session because of the cookies. It can see that, yes, I am responding to a form it sent me because it has the correct time-linked secret code in it, and then it will make the payment. When Happy Fun tries it, right, they send back the hidden form, they reach out to the bank, and because I haven't requested the form from the bank and gotten the secret code, they can't send that back, right? How could they do it? So if happyfun.com reaches out to the bank for that form, that's not going to work. The bank doesn't know who they are. If it reaches through us and out to the bank for the form, that form goes back to our browser and not back to happyfun.com. So this helps to break that cycle. There are still some ways to get around this kind of thing, but you can see how it works. Another example of this is clickjacking. Okay, an attacker sends you a link, and you click on it. You open the link, you connect to some site. The browser, opens the target website. The victim then clicks what appears to be a visually harmless UI element, and now code is running in the browser. Simple type of attack. So let's talk about access control lists for just a moment and see how that model versus the capabilities model applies to this. Remember the access control list model. ACLs, we have a subject, and then we have objects, and for each object, we have the rights for different subjects. This is a little permissions line that you might see when you list files on Linux. It might be the permissions you see when you open the properties for a file on Windows. And the problem is that ACLs aren't really set up to handle this kind of a problem. There's a really good paper about this by Tyler Close called Access Control Lists Don't, that is, they don't control access. And it's worth reading. There's a link to it there. The access control list is a nice static thing, and it's very simple. It's simple to create and simple to apply, but it has some challenges. We talked about access control lists and capabilities before, and basically an access control list was a column in the access table, and capability was a row, and it seemed like they were just basically the same thing. But they operate in a little bit different way. So let's talk about that. So for each object, an ACL is just a tuple of the rights for each subject. So for example, on a Linux system, there are rights for the file owner, there are rights for the group the file belongs to, and then there are rights for everyone. There can be additional ACLs. I can give a particular user additional rights as well. But basically, you can think of it as a list. Here are the different subjects in the system, and here's the rights for each subject. Now, a message, let's think of a message being sent through the kernel, consists of an identification of the sending process followed by some data. Now, what's really going on here? So, for example, I want to write to a file, so identification, right? Who am I? That's handled by the operating system, and we can presume it can't be forged. When we receive the message, the operating system then checks my identity, and it checks the ACL to see if I have the permission to do whatever it is I'm trying to do. Easy to implement, and it's easy to check. For a capability, it's a little different. Under capabilities, a message consists, right? Messages always originate with a subject, consists of a list of permissions and some data. So I want to, let's say, I want to have the compiler compile something. So what I have to do then is pass along permissions that I hold to the compiler to allow it to do that. So each permission in the list is selected by the message sender, right? I choose from the permissions that I have, and I send them along. And the permissions are added by the kernel, so we presume they can't be forged. And a message recipient can then in turn send messages, additional accesses, using any of the permissions provided by that message or already held by the recipient. So let's get a little more concrete. Again, as I said before, an ACL is like a column, right? The billing file, you don't have any access to it, but the compiler does. A capability is like a row. So I can execute the compiler, but I have no permissions for the billing file. So under the capabilities model, I would tell the compiler, hey, I want you to execute. Here's my permission that says I can execute you. And I want you to write to the billing file. Oh, but I don't have that permission. I can't send it along because I don't possess it. And so I can't authorize the compiler to write to the billing file. I just can't do that. Now, when the compiler is done, it itself can still write to the billing file because it has that capability. But I can't pass that along for it to do it on my behalf. And this helps protect us against the confused deputy problem. You may have noticed Linux still has ACLs because ACLs are simple. There's a role for both. You're going to encounter ACLs everywhere you go, and you'll probably encounter capabilities. Most systems have some form of capabilities, but the capabilities often take the form of things that are checked by a security manager or an access control manager or something like that. So you might say, I want to print this, and it will check to see if you have the right to print it. And there can be many of these, right? Maybe you have the right to set the system clock. Maybe you have the right to modify certain system properties. And those will typically be stored as capabilities. You can still have confused deputies, and the compiler can still write to the billing file. And so if you can get it doing just the right thing, it might still override it. But this makes it much harder to exploit it in that way. Even so, even with this notion of capabilities, even with knowledge of this kind of attack, it's still everywhere, and it's still ongoing. I mean, you see people using browser-in-browser attacks. These fake the single sign-on page, and once you fake the single sign-on page, you might be able to capture some information from somebody, right? It's a browser-in-browser attack. That's it.